Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to AMA number 39, our first HoloFuel special. Today, we have Mary Camacho, Executive Director, and myself, David Atkinson, Commercial Director of Holochain. So firstly, a thank you. So thank you, everyone, for your ongoing support, everyone for all your participation in various community groups and various online channels. And especially a big thank you for all of your questions about HoloFuel that have been coming up over the last few months. So we're going to go into details of some of these questions in this special. But first, an announcement. We've got the applications for DevCamp 7 are now live. As most of you would know, our dev camps are completely community organized and run. And also we have a nice pattern where different members of the community tend to run different dev camps, so it's not just the same group. So we're really excited for this iteration. So please get your applications in. The link for the dev camp will be live in the chat. Next, if you want to stay in touch, we're sharing updates every 2 to 3 days on Telegram, Twitter, the Holo Forum, Holochain Forum. So plenty of ways of keeping abreast of progress. If you'd like to get more involved, please visit the Holochain Forum, forum.holochain.org. If you're a developer, please start getting involved with one of the virtual hackalongs that some of the core community members are running. They're super popular. I think there's 2 or 3 operating right now. And if you're really starting to think about the app that you want to build, it is a good time to start dipping your toe in the app building water. I think there's now a groundswell of people building applications and a lot of community support. So please just visit the forum and start getting involved. In terms of events, we've got about 6 online meetups coming up in the next week. If you go to holo.host/events, then you can get the list of upcoming events. I know everyone's dying to hear. So Mary, can you give us a little update on the recent progress?
Sure. So sometimes our updates are a little more scripted. I'm going to be winging it a bit more today with some of these answers. But we're in the middle of testing with core community testers right now. Well, I say in the middle, but we're really just starting. And we started a few days ago with this. And basically, what everybody's been waiting for when it comes to Holo releases is for us to release or open up the HP admin and HoloFuel. That's the host's first access into the hosting environment. And if you've followed along with all of those updates that David was just talking about, then you've probably seen that we've had a lot of fits and starts, and we've come at it, thought we were ready to do a release to a wider community, and then we'd hit some optimization issues or some we'd find validation errors that would stop us, and we'd go back and go through another iteration of development. And that's really been a process that we've been going through. Even though we've kind of been ready with the basic functionality for this for quite a while, but it's really tricky. I mean, with distributed technology and testing of distributed technology, and that I know we've said this a few times, and people come back and go, "Oh, this is the same as what everybody else has been building for years and years," and but it's not web technology. We're not building web applications. We're building the infrastructure top to bottom, and that starts with Holochain. And so where we really, and this is some we'll get into in a little bit when we start talking about HoloFuel, is what parts are HoloFuel, what parts are Holochain, and what parts are Holo, because these are different. So back to the progress, we've started doing this work where we're bringing on these core community testers. There's about 30 of them out there, I think, that are working with us. And what we're testing right now is the process it takes for each new person, each new node, to enter this hosting environment. Because if you think about it, when a new host comes on, they're having to download all of the data. This is what you see with any large environment where somebody has to sort of get connected in with all the existing data and then be able to validate new data, because you're part of this, peer-to-peer network. So what we found is that when we made some of the fixes that we really needed, they were like key finds about a month or so ago. We corrected some of these validation errors that started giving us visibility to certain things, which is that there's these areas that are not as optimized as they need to be for real peers to be on our network. So little by little, we've been getting that optimization in, and now we're getting it better and better, such that we need to get the community of testers grown. And we're measuring how long it takes for each new person to come in. And then we're having people run transactions. So we started doing that this last week. We got some really good feedback, some really good data. We've already given that back to our devs. And now we actually have 3 different test environments that we're running. So we've got the environments that we're running with the core testers right now. And then we've set up another sort of the latest and greatest QA environment that we're putting the optimizations in as they come out of dev. So almost every day we're doing another deploy of these optimizations from our dev team. And then if those are better than what we were in before, we'll be moving testers into those other environments. So it's a little tricky getting everybody into the right places with their distributed, Holochain apps on HoloPorts, but it's going really well. And we really appreciate everyone are the community testers who are signing up to do this, who are scheduling with us. It's a little bit of a hassle. Some of the tests have taken quite a long time. Others have been really fast. We hope to get it faster and faster. So that's where we are.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. I think I've got so many questions, and I know, but
let's talk about HoloFuel.
Yeah, exactly. Is there anything you can share before we go into HoloFuel about some of the initial results or some of the initial experiences for the testers, just so people out there get a sense?
Well, I mean, I would say for some of the initial testers, it's been frustrating because, like I just said, it's taking too long. As we get to 9, 10 or more nodes on the network, it takes longer and longer for them to download that first set. And what we just found is that there's some small things that we can do that change that experience dramatically. So what's happening is that, like, we just changed the test protocol to make it a lot easier for people to get onboarded onto the network faster, and then they start transacting more. And when people get to transact, then they really like it. So that's a different sort of experience. We're actually going to be doing some numbers. We're actually testing over the course of the next few days, where we're comparing what they're doing right now, which is sort of like it has some optimizations, but it doesn't have the latest ones. And then there's the part that we're doing in QA right now, that we're testing the latest optimizations. And we're literally going to be able to compare what it's like for the first 20 to 30 people joining the Holo network and getting onto HoloFuel and doing transactions. And we'll have numbers about how long it takes them to join the network on both of these. And then we're going to get feedback from the same testers on how it was in the first one, how long it took for them to join, and then how did it go for them to do transactions. And so we'll have some comparative data that even shows like the kind of day or two sort of optimization work and improvements that we're making. So that's something I'm really looking forward to capturing and sharing in the next few days.
Okay, super. Really, really, really exciting. Okay, we'll go on to HoloFuel. So as I said, we've been getting lots of questions about HoloFuel for a long period of time. And so this AMA is now all about HoloFuel. I'll be asking Mary a series of questions. And just for those of you who've joined and want to know, well, what am I going to get out of this? If you're an app developer, the purpose of this session is to help you get clear on the difference between building different currencies on Holochain and the currency of HoloFuel that we are building to support the hosting network, the Holo hosting network. So that's one. For hosts and others, it's getting clear that HoloFuel is part of that Holo hosting ecosystem, not the Holochain ecosystem. And so the difference, again, similar thing, the difference between building a currency on a Holochain and HoloFuel as part of the Holo hosting ecosystem. And then finally, there's some series of questions for people who are holding the hot token around some of the swap and the mechanics of the swap and all of those kind of things. But I'm just going to jump into it now. So first, Mary, so can you provide a little bit more information on the consensus mechanism in the upcoming mainnet and the function HoloFuel serves?
Great. And this is a great question, and you can see automatically this isn't one we came up with because we wouldn't have asked about consensus. I'm going to try to break down some of the important points to clarify between Holochain, Holo, and HoloFuel. Okay, so Holochain, starting there, because Holochain is the basic infrastructure that we're building on. Holochain provides data integrity and without a need for global consensus. Okay, so we're not going to have technically a mainnet. We will use that term, but there isn't this one thing that's going up. Each distributed app, each application on Holochain is a distinct, encrypted peer-to-peer network with its own DHT, its own distributed hash ledger, basically. So Holochain doesn't have a native token. There is no built-in currency. That's really important. Holo is where HoloFuel lives. HoloFuel is a distributed app built for the Holo network. Okay, but for Holochain is infrastructure. It's completely peer-to-peer. It's distributed. There's no miners. There's no stakers. Each user has their own local hash chain where they record only their own actions. You're the sole cryptographic authority to sign new records to your personal chain without consensus, agreement, or validation from anyone else. So I know that sounds a little funny, but a lot of you who know about Holochain, you probably have heard Arthur talk about this quite a bit. So with Holochain, you're publishing data from your personal source chains then to a validating DHT. And this serves as the shared or global ledger space, okay? So validation then is performed by randomized peers on their, basically out there on the network. And this ensures that personal chains are tamper-proof and they can't be rolled back, so you can't get double spending, and because you would have detection from the data published to the DHT. Okay, so that's kind of, I know I'm getting a little bit technical, and we said this was going to be about HoloFuel and about the currency, but it really is important to understand that this is something running on Holochain infrastructure. So really, you need to trust your own copy of the application that is the currency. You can validate anything yourself according to the rules of the application that is the currency, including other people's chains, their actions, their transactions, and it will refuse to transact with anyone who has committed invalid transactions to their chain. So this is that sort of validation, that's all in the infrastructure layer of Holochain. So then let's talk about Holo, because Holo is the environment or the network in which HoloFuel runs. We like to say that HoloFuel powers the Holo network. So Holo, as you probably know, it's the peer hosting infrastructure. This involves multiple distributed applications running on top of Holochain, plus some semi-centralized DNS routing infrastructure. Holo does have a mainnet, and that's for the beta hosting network. And right now, what we've been talking about when we're talking about status is our alpha test nets. So Holo, as I said before, has a built-in currency, which is the distributed application called HoloFuel. And this can enable billions of microtransactions needed to run the hosting network. So HoloFuel is one of the distributed applications built on Holochain that comprises and enables the Holo hosting platform to work. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a second. Do you want to dig into any of that, David, or do you want me to try to go any further on it?
Maybe could you go a little bit further on the purpose of HoloFuel in the hosting network?
Sure. So we talk a lot about the microtransactions for HoloFuel. It's really, really important because the way that the Holo network works is that we require micropayments for the distributed hosting marketplace. So like any other cloud network, the hosting network requires a medium of exchange for transactions between hosts and consumers of the hosting capacity. In a centralized network, that would mean, the centralized hosting company and the customer. And in a marketplace, so if you think of something that wasn't hosting, but maybe something like Airbnb, you have two sides to the marketplace, plus Airbnb sort of being this go-between in the middle, and they help facilitate the transactions that are typically in a national currency. Well, with HoloFuel, we have built a framework so that the two peers basically on different sides of this marketplace, you've got your hosts and you've got your publishers, they're interacting directly. That's the point of facilitating peer-to-peer transactions. So we don't have to be involved in the middle of that. And because of that, one part of because of that is that they're doing microtransactions because they're building up micro trust between them with the host transaction. So, hey, would you host my application? A publisher might go out and say, I'd like it to be hosted by all these hosts. And the host is giving credit essentially by hosting. So they get to say how much they're willing to do that. How much do they trust the publisher to pay them? Because this is a peer-to-peer transaction. So these are broken down in very much micro transactions. It can be done multiple times a day, by seconds. I'm not going to get into how Holo hosting works here. I'm actually not prepared to talk about that, but essentially it's a lot of the same types of things that you could expect. You're paying for compute power, you're paying for bandwidth, you're paying for storage, but those things are broken up in very small increments, and they can be invoiced immediately. And so the host gets to say how fast they want to invoice and how they get to basically adjust if they don't get payments from hosts, whether or not they continue hosting them, or from publishers, I'm sorry. So the purpose, back to the question, is to facilitate all of those things, because you as a publisher may put your application out to get hosted, and you may have 1,000 hosts host that one application. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, so for people out there, so the components, just so I'm really clear, there's a component of facilitating the transaction, there's a component of supporting trust, and there's a component of issuing credit effectively.
Yeah, I wouldn't use those terms there.
Great.
Because credit, the way that we talk about credit lines in a mutual currency, mutual credit currency, is a little different than that. Basically, they're just saying they're agreeing to provide service.
Gotcha.
And they get to say how much service they'll provide before they get paid.
Okay, so it's a service at risk, depending on the level of trust that's built into the network is your assessment of the risk. Right.
Right.
Okay.
So and instead of, like sometimes if you think about, oh, I'm going to get my utilities turned on at my house just to make it really commercial or, very consumer based. I'm going to get my utilities turned on at my house. And often the utilities will go, okay, great, but why don't you put down 100, pounds credit or deposit down, because, well, we don't know who you are and we don't really have that trust relationship with you. Well, we don't have that sort of thing engaged. So instead it's like, oh, well, you want to invoice me every hour or every few hours, however much the increment may be. And let's build up that relationship. Let's build up that trust over time. And people, the hosts will be able to make adjustments to how they want to do this and how often they want to invoice and get paid.
Okay, amazing. All right. Okay, I'll stop getting excited again and go back to
let me just say one other thing, because we talked about microtransactions, and there's one other part of one other piece of this that is a microtransaction, and that is the transaction fee that gets paid to Holo for facilitating the transactions. So as small as those transactions may be that are being made between peers, there's another form of transaction that's being made, which is a 1% transaction fee that's being set aside by the payer of HoloFuel And those are collected a little bit differently. So I didn't really get into the details about how this works because there's more. And these microtransactions do end up getting batched together in some ways. And this is a pattern that we use to actually make things more, to optimize the network essentially. So that batching is really important when it comes to paying for transaction fees, because if you can imagine, if you have a microtransaction that's being paid from a publisher to a host that say it's, 1 cent, 2 cents, 1% of that is being set aside as a transaction fee for Holo. So we really get into tiny, tiny increments of things. And so those end up getting batched, and Holo gets to say how large or how small that batching is before we go and we collect it. And that doesn't happen as part of the transaction. So we're not in between the peer-to-peer transaction in HoloFuel. Instead, we have a different service that goes and collects the payments that are set aside already. And that's built into the DNA of HoloFuel. And for those of you who don't know, DNA is how we describe the rules of the application. And basically, it's built into the code of the application.
Okay, great. And you've said it a couple of times, but just so people are really clear, so is HoloFuel an application?
Yes, HoloFuel is a distributed application. HoloFuel, if you hear us talking about hApps, hApps, Holochain applications, HoloFuel is the first major distributed application that people will be testing on the Holo network.
Okay, great. Okay. And so for people thinking about wallets and used to that kind of world, like the HoloFuel application essentially will provide a wallet for your HoloFuel?
We don't typically use the term wallet. It works a little bit differently than a lot of other token currencies that are out there. Basically, you have a HoloFuel account. The way that HoloFuel is structured is sometimes this makes it easier for people to understand, and I think sometimes it makes it harder for people to understand, but it's like a ledger. It's like an accounting ledger, right? You make a transaction, one account goes up, the other account goes down. It's always equal to 0 at a balance level, right? And so when payments are getting made between peers, the publisher has a balance of HoloFuel. The host may or may not have a balance of HoloFuel, but the publisher will pay the host. The host balance goes up, the publisher balance goes down. I mean, this is basic, transactional. It sounds really obvious, but kind of the thing about this is that it's not like you're actually sending tokens and that sort of thing. You're running a transaction that is cryptographically secure, and you have to use your private keys, and you are the only agent that can run your transactions on your own chain, that can sign transactions to your own chain. And it requires a synchronous dual sign transaction. So that's when we were talking about the speed and the microtransactions and why, and we'll get into this, I think, with a few of the other questions. HoloFuel is really built to provide for always on synchronous transactions that are signed by both parties.
That's great. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. So there's plenty of questions and lots of interest about the swap. So could you elaborate a little bit more on the swap mechanism when the Holo hosting beta or mainnet is live? Is there a bridge available, and will users be able to swap only in one direction? So only from ERC20 to HoloFuel, or will it be bidirectional?
Right. I wish I had prepared a diagram for this. It might have been better, but so basically, let's start with this. The mechanism for the swap is going to be via our hot reserve account. So hot holders will be able to swap to HoloFuel immediately upon our beta mainnet launch of the Holo hosting platform. And really what swap means is that they're guaranteed a 1-to-1 unit swap. And this is going to be in place for no less than 6 months. So typically, I want to do a little aside here before I keep going. Typically, the way that our hot reserve works, when people are buying HoloFuel at the hot reserve, what they're doing is they're using hot, which is a token, to purchase HoloFuel. And we call it a swap because we're guaranteeing 1-to-1 equivalence. But even after that, they'll be able to, the actual hot reserve is actually going to stay open beyond that 6-month period or guaranteed 1-to-1 period. And this is so that we will have a bridge into HoloFuel. We don't know exactly, I mean, I think we talked about this, we don't know exactly when HoloFuel will be on exchanges. We've been talking to different exchanges. We expect it to be on different exchanges, but we don't know how fast that will be once we get into our mainnet. And so that's up to some of the other, some of the exchanges put in, because they're going to have to run a HoloFuel node in order to do that. So they have some thinking about it to do as well. And some of them are really excited about it. That's great, but we can't make any guarantees on that. So our hot reserve really is the entrance into the Holo hosting network via HoloFuel. So, post-launch, we're going to announce the beginning of the 6-month period. While anybody can purchase HoloFuel with HOT at the reserve account, only hosts who have proof of service for hosting can redeem HoloFuel for HOT. So let me say that a different way. The direction where people want to swap HOT into HoloFuel will be available immediately. And anybody who has HOT can swap or purchase HoloFuel with HOT. The other direction, if you want to go from HoloFuel to HOT, that is only for hosts. So the way this is structured is that hosts get paid in HoloFuel, and when they do that, they have proof of service logs, essentially. Our service logger app keeps those, and you have to have service logs in addition to HoloFuel to be able to go the other direction and get HOT redeemed for the HoloFuel. Does that make sense?
Yep. Makes sense. Okay, Mary, there's a couple of live questions that have come in that I think will be helpful clarification. So one, just really simple one. One is, will the 1% be around forever? So
Yes.
I think that person's referring to the 1%.
Absolutely. The 1%, the 1% fee on the transaction fee, it's critical. It's what pays for all of the infrastructure services that are being provided for the Holo network. Yep. I mean, there's a lot going on beyond the distributed applications in order. So let me step back one quick second, because I may not have gone into detail. The Holo network is intended to make available distributed applications to regular users of browsers on the internet. Okay, so that normally isn't something that's possible. If you have a distributed application, you can only interact with other people who have installed and who are basically nodes in that distributed application, right? What Holo makes possible is that, your parents, your grandparents, your sister, who doesn't yet know about distributed applications, but who may want to, but because it's just, hey, well, this is another chat app that's really cool and very secure, and oh, I want to get into that community and do these things with these people, she can go to a website, log in, and be on that distributed application hosted via Holo. That requires a bridge to certain centralized services. So Holo is this middle place, right? We are building most of our network with applications that are also distributed, but we have to provide layers of centralized infrastructure in order to make all of this work. And so transaction fees are really the revenue that Holo makes to be able to continue being in business and providing that service. I'll just say one other thing about that. The 1% also, it also goes to fund Holochain, because Holo is owned by a foundation. Holo is owned by the Holochain Foundation. And so Holochain is the core infrastructure for all these distributed applications. And in order to support that foundation and the ecosystem of those applications and the continued development and expansion of that distributed HApp ecosystem, that 1% goes a long way, right? It goes into Holo, and then it goes further into Holochain through the Holochain Foundation.
Right. Okay. And just for context, cloud computing, their operating margins are up around the 15% mark. So just for people out there. Okay. And another really quick one is just a clarification on a few previous statements, but the HoloFuel HApp is for transacting with the currency HoloFuel. Is that correct? Yep. Okay. Perfect. Yeah.
That's the basic functionality of HoloFuel, is for transacting with HoloFuel.
Beautiful. I mean, okay, we're going to go back into the swap for a minute. Could you explain a little bit of the token swap ratio for the different token allocations? I think you covered a bit in the previous question, but let's be really clear for people.
Well, it's really simple. It's 1-to-1. You're going to swap one hot ERC20 token, and that will convert into 1 unit of HoloFuel.
Thank you. Okay, so since the total supply of HoloFuel / hot tokens can still change dynamically, how can we keep track of when the supply changes? And if there's a discrepancy, how do we update services like CoinMarketCap to provide an accurate current supply?
Right. Well, this starts getting into a whole different world of it. I just want to step back to my last answer for just a second, because we were talking about the swap, and I want to make sure I'm very explicit. The swap is a period of 6 months where the guarantee is 1-to-1. After that 6 months, there may be some float between the prices between hot and HoloFuel, and that is something we'll start explaining a little bit later with some of the other questions that are asked here. I just want to make sure I make that explicit. Okay, so this is back to the supply question. And since we're looking at the total supply of hot and HoloFuel, we're calling them tokens. Okay, well, first off, the hot supply won't change. Hot is an ERC20 token. It's got a contract. There's a supply. It's not something that can be mined, so it doesn't have any mechanism for growing or anything like that. I would say it has a mechanism for shrinking, because we know people lose it when they send it into accounts that they can no longer get it out of, but I'm just teasing. So the hot supply will not change, but that's different than HoloFuel. So let's talk about HoloFuel. So all HoloFuel nodes have visibility to the DHT for the HoloFuel application. So they have the ability to query for transactions and balances of other nodes. So just to be really clear, every time you do a transaction with another node, you are running validations on the source chain, on the HoloFuel source chain of that other node, to make sure that that node is valid, to make sure that their balance is accurate. So this is built into the rules of the HoloFuel application now. So we're using Holochain to do the validation, but the basic rules about what you want to do for each transaction, that's part of the DNA of HoloFuel, okay? So we're checking their source chain to make sure it's accurate every single time we transact with them, and we're checking for certain things, that they have enough balance, that they have an available balance to be sending to me, that they don't have any warrants against them, that we're getting gossip from other peers on the network. There's a lot of things going on around that as you're looking in, but specifically, if you're in the DHT, if you're a node in the DHT, you have the ability, the ability to query, and it's transparent what other chains are, because all the transactions are in the DHT, okay? There are a few accounts with credit limits that will likely be watched for material changes. And so I don't know if I get into credit limits a lot in this particular set of questions today, but let me see if I can real briefly give you guys a sense of what that means on the HoloFuel network, app network. So the reason we have credit limits and credit in a mutual credit currency system is so that it can expand. If we were limited to a supply of HoloFuel, really all that could change is the value up and down, and you would have dramatic changes. And that's not necessarily something that you want, because the reality is we can keep providing more and more capacity. And as the capacity, since we've talked about this before, when we first started, and we've described it as an asset-backed currency, and the asset that's backing it is the capacity for hosting. So it's the service capacity of the Holo network. So as the Holo network expands, that capacity, that the supply of HoloFuel needs to expand with that additional capacity. And so the mechanisms in HoloFuel are meant to provide for the appropriate expansion and contraction sometimes of the supply to kind of go with capacity and use. So to do that, you have credit limits, and this is what a mutual credit currency design does. And if you're, just want to say this, if you're somebody who's interested in the design, currency designs, we have Arthur Brock is one of our main currency designers. I'm sure you guys have heard about him. But we also have other organizations that he works with, the Commons Engine and Metacurrency. They really put together workshops on how to design currencies, and they focus on how to design mutual credit currencies. And I really encourage people to look those up. They have master classes on this. It's fantastic. HoloFuel is the first example on Holochain of a mutual credit currency. I think that's right. I hate saying the first, and then somebody's going to come around and tell me, oh no, you're wrong. But since Arthur had so much to do with it, I'm sure it is. So anyway, back to how credit limits work in this, is that credit limits are what allow for the expansion. Because remember, if I said one account is going up and another one's going down, that's always going to be the case. And the rules around credit is about how far accounts can go down and how many accounts can give credit. And so there's a couple different kinds of credit lines in the HoloFuel ecosystem. And one of the main ones is the reserve account. And that's the one where, as people put hot in, the reserve actually is holding hot, but the HoloFuel account for the reserve is going into debt as it spends HoloFuel to send it to users in the network who purchase HoloFuel. So that's one way, and that's a pretty straightforward backed one that would be limited. There's also the Holo has a credit line, and that's built out. That's the infrastructure account. We talked about that a little bit in our green paper. So if you kind of go back to the original design documents, you'll see that there's some discussion of credit lines. And that's also there, and that's for supporting the infrastructure as well. And then we have credit lines for hosts. Hosts are the only others that can have credit lines on the system. So if you're just somebody who gets a HoloFuel account, but you don't have a HoloPort, you're not doing hosting activity, you will not have the kind of account that allows you to go negative, that allows you to give credit on the network. And hosts will have credit lines that are very much associated to the hosting that they provide. So it won't go online immediately. It will take some time. This will be something that, after they've got proof of service and we can see what their patterns are, they will have a portion of credit related to their capacity, their hosting capacity. So that's kind of a little bit about how supply can grow. And then to kind of go back to the reserve account as a mechanism for understanding how it can constrain again, is that when hosts redeem HoloFuel or go get hot in exchange for the HoloFuel that they've received for hosting, that actually shrinks the supply again, because they're putting that HoloFuel back onto the reserve HoloFuel account, which starts reducing the negative balance of the reserve. I think I probably went into too much detail on that.
Great. There was a little bit of carnage here in the background as well.
Yeah. I saw the kids running back and forth.
A flashing red sign on the door isn't working today. All right. Yeah. Okay. So let's jump into, so still questions around supply. Got that. So when the supply changes, how do we ensure that HoloFuel value is not being diluted away
Right.
So yes, especially when new HoloFuel is being minted. Can you explain this dynamic a little bit for people?
Well, sure. I mean, so a couple of things. There's limits, and they're built-in limits. The Holo infrastructure account has a fixed credit line that's equal to the supply of hot. So it can never, that's like an ultimate like extension, but that it's not expected to be used. The reserve accounts that are like like the hot account being used for the swap, they have credit limits that are equal to the amount placed into the reserve. So basically, however much is put in, it's sort of like backed. And however much hosting credit we would sell in any reserve currency is managed by algorithms that evaluate the host demand for that currency. So I want to kind of step, I referenced something in this answer that I didn't say before, which is probably really important, which is that reserve accounts are plural. We're starting with one, and it's a hot reserve. And that's because we want to, well, because we have hot as that is swappable into HoloFuel. But we also are going to be creating reserve accounts in other currencies so that people are not limited to coming into the HoloFuel ecosystem, the Holo hosting ecosystem, only from crypto. They also there will be reserve accounts that are in national currencies as well, and they will work exactly the same way as the hot reserve. And so it will be important because this is about managing the supply, there will be algorithms that are evaluating host demand for that currency. So remember, hosts are the ones saying, I want to redeem my, what I just earned for hosting out to another currency. I want to redeem it and go out to hot. I want to redeem it and I want to go out to euros, that sort of thing. And so there's going to be demand that is basically from the host for services that have already been provided, right? And that's what kind of keeps a constraint on it, because it's actually a part that it's looking at a metric that's built in that's about hosting, not even just about the capacity of what the hosting network could do, but about the capacity of what the hosting network has done or is doing. So, and then the other question, I think the other part of it was the host credit lines, and I think I spoke to that one in the last question, which is really not something that's going to start until after beta, but that's going to be limited to a portion of the capacity that a host can provide. So their credit limit could never be something that could have much of any effect. We expect that to be somewhat negligible in terms of the impact to supply.
Okay. Great, thanks. Okay, and actually, while we're on the reserve accounts, another question that's come in is the plan for the hot tokens. So as the swap happens, are there any plans to facilitate the decrease of the number of hot tokens? Or
well, in the near term, yeah. No, I perfectly understand. They're talking about the burn. So in the near term, we're not making a plan for that. And the reason for that is that we're using it as our on-ramp and off-ramp essentially into the crypto markets. The easiest thing for us to do is to manage the kind of purchase and redemption back into crypto through our own ERC20 tokens. So the idea is that it may build up in the reserve account, but that's okay. That sort of stabilizes and kind of holds it there. So it might change like what people think of as circulating hot, because it's sitting in the reserve account, and the only people that can pull it out are hosts who have, with the service logs. But no, our plan right now is not to burn it, and that doesn't mean we won't change that. We're kind of holding that as something, as a possibility, depending on how the external markets change. We don't know and can't predict always what everybody else will do.
Okay, so then still going through these reserve accounts, hot, etc. So will the reserve token price, or the hot price, differ from the HoloFuel price on an exchange? And
okay, so let me restate this question. Let me see if I can say. So will the price to purchase HoloFuel be different on our reserve than the price to purchase HoloFuel on an exchange? That's the question, I think.
Okay. Yep.
So Great. Pricing is funny because I'm always looking at it in a couple of different ways. There's the price that hosts set for hosting that they get paid for in HoloFuel, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is actually purchasing HoloFuel, so purchasing basically the credits, hosting credits, which that's what HoloFuel is representative of, from a reserve account or at an exchange. So the price of HoloFuel at an exchange is set by the market. So we're part of that, the influence on that, obviously. The price of HoloFuel at the Holo reserve account, it's influenced by the demand pressures of the buy and sell of the market, but it's primarily tied to the supply dynamics, right? And the hosting activity that's on the Holo network. The reserve account cannot be used, or cannot be used by arbitrage bots because it's not buy sell. It doesn't go both directions. So it's a little bit different of a dynamic going on than in a typical market, and that keeps it kind of tied to hosting activity on our platform. So only hosts can cash out for their hosting services at the reserve. So yeah, there could be a variance sometimes between the price at a reserve or the price at an exchange. But what we expect is that the tensions between them, that's mostly going to get arbitraged out at the exchange, right? That will kind of, people will go, we talked about this actually. I think if you go to our HoloFuel Economics, the 101 document that, and presentation that Alistair did quite a while back, he talks quite some about that tension between those and how that might work. And I think he even has like a use case that describes it. I mean, it's just basic logic. If something's cheaper at one, you're going to go to that one to do it. And then what will that do? That might actually influence the price at the other one. And so pretty much the change would probably, if it's going to happen via arbitrage, that would happen in exchange. But there are dynamics that may pressure one up or down between the two. So.
Yep. Cool. Thank you. Okay. So another, let's stick with exchanges. So exchange listed HoloFuel and I swapped Bitcoin for HoloFuel. That would show up on the blockchain, but would it also be displayed somewhere on the HoloFuel app or the Holo app?
Yeah. So HoloFuel transactions would show up in the HoloFuel source chains for both you and for the exchange. I think I mentioned earlier that an exchange, part of why it's going to take some effort for exchanges to get this going is they're going to have to run our node. And I know they have to do this for a lot of other things too, but Holochain is new. Not everybody knows how everything works, and they're going to have to run a Holochain node and a HoloFuel node. So it will show up on the source chain for both sides because they sign a synchronous transaction, and it gets saved to both of their source chains. A copy of it is also saved to the HoloFuel DHT. So yes, it'll be visible, it'll be transparent, it can be searched, all that sort of stuff.
Okay, super. And so then how would the public know the balance of an exchange's holdings of HoloFuel or anybody else's?
Well, we haven't written a source chain explorer at this point related to HoloFuel, but each time the HoloFuel transaction is processed, the source chain is inspecting the source chain of the other party. And I'm sure this will happen. I'm sure people will build these. It's not on our roadmap right now to build this, but an app bridge to HoloFuel could easily use a known hash address being a HoloFuel account, public key essentially, to inspect and sum the transactions from that source chain to get a valid balance.
Got it. Thank you. All right. So back to is every cryptocurrency built on Holochain created as a hApp?
Yeah. Everything. Okay. Every currency is it's a distributed application, a distributed Holochain application, so a hApps.
All right. And then, are there any centralization constraints? So by design, is every cryptocurrency built on a Holochain technically centralized?
No, every currency built on Holochain is inherently decentralized, structurally decentralized. So Holochain is distributed application. It's not a centralized application framework. So the application running on it, I mean, I guess somebody could really go out of their way and try to tie it to things and centralize, but that'd be a lot of extra work for no good reason. Actually, just to be really clear, Holochain, the license that people have to be able to create hApps in Holochain is requires that the agents, or that the nodes, the people essentially who are using the hApp, that they control their private keys, that no centralized authority can control the private keys. So that's a super, super important distinction. It doesn't mean that you can't transact with people who are centralizing things or have other things associated to it that are centralized. I mean, like I said, Holo has some centralized or semi-centralized infrastructure, but HoloFuel is inherently decentralized. And every currency that you would build on Holochain would also be decentralized.
Perfect. And anybody can build a currency on a Holochain.
Oh yeah, yeah. Anybody can build a currency on Holochain. Anybody can build any kind of distributed app. It's basically, it may as well be like any other language or infrastructure out there that's open source. It's available. You can go, you can fork it, you can start building, do what you want. Talk to people in the community, get some good advice, learn how to architect apps that are decentralized for Holochain. And I mean, there's some, it's not do whatever you want, but
yep.
You get the picture.
You get the picture. Okay. And so then is every currency that's created that, as you said, anyone can come and design, but albeit need to sort of build a bit of context. Is every currency created, oh, well, they're back. Created on a Holochain, a clone of HoloFuel, or not necessarily a clone of HoloFuel?
No, not at all. Currencies built on Holochain can have any number of mechanisms and designs. We think that Holochain is especially good for mutual credit, asset-backed designs that require always-on infrastructure. So it's really important for people to hear this, because you don't want to clone HoloFuel. HoloFuel will be useless to most other hApp developers trying to build a currency, because the needs of the Holo network are very, very specific. Okay, we have to have synchronous signed transactions because it's doing microtransactions all the time, every day, between hosts and publishers. The publishers are turning things on, the hosts are paying for it, but the hosts are always on. They're assumed to be on. They're hosting, right? They have to be on. And so we didn't build this. We didn't build HoloFuel to support everything always for a lot of things. We built it, we designed it to really support Holo. And so there's that aspect of it. There's also aspects of it that involved how we're doing transaction fees. You could build any design you want, put any kind of transaction fee that you wanted for a different kind of cryptocurrency. It could be mutual credit or not, but mutual credit is what we're really trying. We built Holochain to be especially good at building mutual credit currencies. And so that's what we're trying to have people understand as a new possibility. But the efficiency of the currency would obviously be dependent on the design. They wouldn't all be equally fast. They wouldn't all be equally secure. So you'd really want to do your homework. You'd want to have people verifying it, validating it, which is what we're doing with ours.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so that gives a picture as well. So HoloFuel pushes the design of what we think of cryptocurrencies in a way that there's nothing else out there like it, but it doesn't push to an extreme, there are many other possibilities for currencies to be designed on Holochain that take advantage of the features of Holochain that HoloFuel doesn't already. That's really helpful. Okay. So once HoloFuel's live, I'm sure there's going to be a huge amount of demand for people to be really testing features like asynchronous transactions on other currencies.
Right, and there are other, I mean, we've built, I mean, just to be really clear, we've built an async version and a sync version for various reasons, because we've needed to try out different models at different points, and we were considering certain possibilities of downtime or uptime and that sort of thing. And so actually, I think, you know, we've got 2 of them live right now, but there's even some work right now on an async version that is a mutual credit currency that's happening in the community that some folks are expanding on, which they did base it on one of the original you know, designs of HoloFuel. It's not that we haven't played with some of these others and that we haven't even used them for HoloFuel at times. We have, but when we go into beta, it's going to be synchronous transactions only. Just so you're clear, that can't happen just yet, because not all of the functionality of the Holo platform is built. Not all of the functionality that's needed for, you know, some of the synchronous signing is completed yet, and that's a little bit later in our roadmap. So we'll be getting things there, and we'll be making modifications even to HoloFuel as we keep going. What we're releasing right now for HoloFuel is not everything that will be in beta. It's the core of how to make transactions work primarily. And it's the core of how to have it integrate with Holo hosting and our platforms right now, and how to work end to end. So that's kind of where we are in the stage.
I'm going to go with one last question. So it's kind of 2 parts. So one part is, can a total privacy coin be built on Holochain? And the second part, if so, what are the consequences, or could it have a negative effect on exchanges or government approvals for Holo as a hosting company with regards to KYC AML?
Okay. Well, can a total so let me think through this one a little bit. So can a total privacy coin be built on Holochain? I would assume so, but I'd have to think about some of the other implications, because one of the things that I'm so enmeshed in what we're building for Holo right now that sometimes when people ask me what else can people do in Holochain, I get a little bit like starry-eyed, because you can do almost anything in Holochain. But instead of trying to answer that fully, I'm going to move to the second part of it. If it can, could that have a negative effect on exchanges, government approvals for Holo? Absolutely not. Because whatever somebody else builds on Holochain, it has nothing to do with what Holo builds on Holochain, and Holo is responsible for, as a company that is getting, you know, going through a process to be regulated in Gibraltar for, you know, for doing DLT type work. And so if cryptocurrencies, well, let me go back a little bit. Hosting of applications. And so I'm gonna shift gears away from HoloFuel for just a minute and kind of get into some of the other parts of being what it means to be regulated. Hosting of applications by hosts. Now that's an area that we may care about, right? That's a business area for, you know, we're facilitating a marketplace for hosting. So regulators may care that they meet certain jurisdictional requirements or things like that. But that's not about somebody else building a hApp and having a Holochain hApp that can do almost anything. If cryptocurrencies, for instance, are illegal in a jurisdiction, then a publisher of a cryptocurrency hApp that's publishing it to Holo, they would have to exclude the jurisdictions that it would be illegal in, because you don't want the hosts providing cryptocurrency services to something that's illegal, potentially. I mean, but that's really a one-off thing where each jurisdiction has their own rules. Those things apply already all over the world. A lot of people know about them, people blog about them, but that doesn't have anything really to do with Holo's regulations, because we need to meet our regulations ourselves, and we do. Well, no, we're going through a process to be regulated. We assume that we do.
Great. Well, I think we're getting close to an hour, so I'm going to leave it there if that's okay. Is there anything else you want to share before we close off? I know we're going to have another one of these on HoloFuel in the coming weeks. So anything else that you want to share?
I don't really have anything in particular about HoloFuel else. I mean, there's so many parts and pieces to HoloFuel that we're building, that we're testing, that we're doing now. So, you know, if you're a host and you're keep watching the forum, because we're going to be getting things out to you guys. If you're somebody who's already volunteered to be part of our pre-release testers, those will be the ones that get to test right after we finish up with our core community testers that are working with us now. So we're just really looking forward to getting this out and having people see this. So the optimizations we're making now are what's making that possible. So it's exciting to be in this stage, and yeah, look forward to more questions.
Yep. Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Mary. That was fantastic. Thanks everyone who jumped in and asked questions. I think we got to about half of them, so please keep the questions coming over the coming days, and we'll make sure we catch the ones that were asked that we couldn't get to today, as well as any in the future for the next HoloFuel AMA, which we'll be announcing when that's coming. A quick reminder around DevCamp 7 for those of you who are listening and are interested. The link should be on the channel, so please get your application in for DevCamp 7 and stay involved. Like we said at the start, visit the Holochain forum, forum.holochain.org. Check out the latest events, holo.host/events. And yeah, for all of you who've been waiting patiently or impatiently, fantastic to hear the progress of the team. Just a big thank you to all of the developers and both in the core team and the community and everybody who's pushing like crazy to get things up and in the community testers. And a big thank you to all the community testers for being so willing to get involved. So yeah, love hearing the progress and looking forward to the next AMA. Thank you, Mary.